Good afternoon. My name is Leah, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the CA Service Operations Insight Global User Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. Stephen Sheldon, you may begin.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the SOI webcast for January 2013. I hope everybody had a good Christmas and New Year's. We've got a few interesting things planned for you today. Dave Walters is going to be coming on shortly, talking about some new updates to the product, and then we're going to be having Jeff Vaught do a presentation. That's going to be covering SNMP and the connector for that. After that, we're going to have a Q&A session. If you guys have any questions for him or for Dave, definitely feel free to ask up top in the Q&A, or there will also be audio question opportunities too through the operator after that. Now, one of the main things I first wanted to bring up was the contest that we posted online and emailed about to give away a free CA World ticket. I currently show that we have 2 ideas that are both at 130 points. And whichever idea comes up at the highest number of vote points on the ideas section of the community is what's going to be awarded a free CA World ticket for CA World in April this year. And so I definitely suggest everybody in the next 5 days, because it's only going on for 5 more days, go on the community site and vote. Vote for any ideas you think are great. If you still have any great ideas you want to post yourself, definitely get them up there. Look over any existing ones, because you've only got 5 days left. It's a great opportunity to get a free CA World Pass. And speaking of CA World, I'm definitely looking forward to meeting everybody again, those that I have before and any new people as well at CA World this year. And if you have any questions, too, about the contest or about CA World, feel free to use the Q&A time at the end of this as well. This is going to be one of our last webcasts prior to CA World. There's going to be another one shortly beforehand, but so close to it, I'd imagine that any major questions you have, this would probably be the best time to ask them. So definitely take advantage of that. And even after this call, if you guys were wondering anything about the contest or CA World in general, feel free to email us at any time. And the winner of the CA World contest is going to be whoever has the most points total. It's not simply points that were added in after we started the contest, and it's for anything that's been accepted as well, so anything at all on that Ideas tab. And if you don't know how to get there, it's at the very top of the community. There's a button called Ideas. And I generally like the top all-time section of that to see who the current winner so far is. So that's all I've got on that. I'd like to pass it now over to Dave Walters.
Yeah, okay, thanks a lot, Stephen. I'm David Walters in Product Management, part of the Product Management team for SOI. And what I'll do is just take a brief moment to give you a quick update on what we are doing with the product. So that's my piece here, a quick roadmap update, and then we're going to have Jeff, one of our senior architects, come on the line and talk about, as Stephen mentioned, the SNMP Connector, its usage, and creating policy for it, and show us a demo. So we'll get to the demo portion here of the presentation in a moment with Jeff, and then after that we'll have our open Q&A. So for my piece, I just want to jump straight to an update on what we are doing with the product from a roadmap perspective. We did have a thing called SOI Release 3.5 coming out as the next thing that we had told you about previously. We've pushed that out a little. What we're doing in the near term is issuing a sort of a couple service packs and dot releases. The current release for just another week or so is what we told you last time. We have our 3.0 with the CR2, and that's available in the typical download place that you may know and love. But what we've been working on since then is 3.0 Service Pack Free and then a release 3.1. They're relatively similar in weight, these two releases. We've called one a service pack and one a dot release essentially for various internal reasons. But they are focusing on bug fixes and various supportability, usability, performance, security, and fail-safe enhancements. So I'll describe those in one level deeper detail here in a moment. Importantly, from an overall portfolio perspective, we're also working on some connector updates. The big one there probably is Spectrum. There's a lot going on with the Spectrum Connector and the Spectrum Connector team. Lately, we have a new version of the Spectrum Connector out in our test base right now. We have a subset of our customers that are helping us test and do customer validation on our Service Pack 3. They are also testing our new Spectrum Connector. Recently, we've had a new CAPC, or the IM 2.0 connector has been released. They're going to be adding some capabilities to that in the coming months. The APM connector has got some roadmap items that we cover in another session if that was interesting. But the connectors are sort of across the board are also being updated as we go. In terms of timing, the Service Pack 3 is in its last week right now of customer validation. We intend to go GA on that mid to late January, so January 18th is our current target. And we would recommend everybody pick up that Service Pack because it has a number of important fixes that you'll see here in a moment. For 3.5, we did push that out. It's now planned to be released in the second half of this calendar year, and will include all those applicable Service Pack fixes as well as issues identified by the customers in the 3.5 beta that we did late last year. But the features for 3.5 at a high level also include service templates, customer modeling, headless APIs, some auditing enhancements, and a new underlying Catalyst integration platform version. So we are going to, for the rest of today's update, on my piece at least, talk about the service packs and the new dot release 3.1. And then Jeff is going to get into some of this other current content. We don't plan to spend a lot of time on the longer-term roadmap in terms of version 3.5 or whatnot today, but if that's of interest, we can let us know and we can cover that in additional sessions. So what are we targeting in these couple of service pack level type releases? There's a variety of stability and supportability and performance enhancements that are on tap. The first one here is enhanced supportability through improved diagnostic logging and triage. So we don't want there to be support problems in the first place, but when there are, there has been some issues in the logging and general verboseness in our logs and so on that need some cleaning up, so we're doing that. There are some performance additions that we're able to take by inserting new multi-threaded capabilities in various portions of the code. There is a push on better error handling and recovery in general, being sure that components are better able to handle and recover from critical errors. So, when things drop out, we don't want them to drop out in a silent or a too noisy fashion. We want to be able to track what has happened and recover from them more readily. There have been, unfortunately, some what we must title here sort of random outages. So we have been pursuing a bunch of those and understanding their causes and looking at fixes and or ensuring a clean recovery for those. And a number of you have also reported and have been dealing with alert delays or alert drift or lack of synchronization problems between SOI and, for example, Spectrum and the Spectrum Connector. So that's been a great topic for us and a great target that we have been working on and improving. So just in terms of the pictorial representation of all this roadmap stuff, we've we've been shipping since June of 2011, our 3.0 release. We then came up with a cumulative release for that on top of that. And the build of this slide's a bit out of order, but we've got these two Service Pack 3, and then the release 3.1. In parallel with that, as I mentioned, these connector enhancements here at the top. And finally, those existing roadmap items on the right there that have been pushed out a bit, our Falcon release, which is 3.5, and then beyond that, we've got a thing called Goldwing on the books with additional enhancements. So I didn't want to belabor the point, but just let you know where we were, particularly in terms of these near-term service packs. And with that, I think I'm done, and we're going to pass it over to Jeff to go through the SNMP Connector and give us a demo of how things work.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Yep.
So yeah, let me just introduce myself. I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to cover with the SNMP Connector. My name is Jeff Vaught. I'm a senior architect on the SOI team. Our team doesn't own the connector from a development perspective, but we have a team within CA, a content team that builds all of the generic connectors and the third-party connectors and develops those. But seeing how those connectors are almost exclusively used by SOI, we have a lot of influence in how those the design of those connectors. So that's why I'm here today. The SNMP connector in particular, why would you use the SNMP connector? It's a generic connector, so it's used in cases where we don't offer a more full-fledged connector, and to something like a SolarWinds or HPBAC or even some of our own products, we don't offer a full connector. So this SNMP connector acts as a generic connector that you can configure by writing policy to integrate with those products. So really the gist, I guess the main pain point with this connector is that it does come out of the box with just some very basic guidance on how to write this policy, and that's what I wanted to mostly focus on today is how you would, and that's been a lot of the questions that have come up on the community site are, how do you write this policy? How do I get started? And we recognize that we're, the documentation isn't great, the examples aren't great, so hopefully we're going to remediate that, and this is just one step towards that, this talk today. So I do have the slides here, but rather than just go through the slides, I'm going to mostly show you just live either policy or the actual connector and being used and sending traps to SOI. So if you do want to download the slides, in live meeting off to the right-hand side of the live meeting, there is there's the feedback button, and then just to the left of that, there's looks like there's an icon that says handouts, and you can download the presentation from there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop. This may just take a second to render on your screen. And the first thing we want to talk about is the community site itself. So I have uploaded some files. So if you go to the SOI community site, there's a community documents section, and I think at the top of that I've drilled down a little bit here, but there's some presentations and so forth. But there's a new folder called SNMP Trap Connector Policy. Within that, I've created a couple subfolders. One is called Tested, and one is called Untested. And in the tested, I've got a sample policy, and the untested, we've got about 4 policies in there. When I say untested, we've done some preliminary testing. Some of these are from internally from within CA, and some, at least one of these is actually from the community, from our customers. And so, they've been tested, but they haven't been thoroughly tested, so you kind of use them at your own risk. And then I've also stuck this presentation here as well. So yeah, by all means, as some of you dive in and start writing your own policy, and if you can get that, send that to through the community process, or post it through the normal posting. I'll try to look through those and sanitize it a bit, and then post them here. And as we are able to test them, we can put them, hopefully build up a good, decent amount of policy. So I guess the first thing is, let's say you want to use an existing policy that someone else has written or CA has written, and you want to apply that to your connector. So I want to show you how to do that. Then I also want to dive in a little bit on how you would write your own policy from scratch, and then the last thing is just to talk a little bit about debugging, and then we can take questions. Yeah. So how to apply this? So today with 3.0, the way you would apply these policies. Let's just go in and click on this under the tested one, and it's a SNMP_policy.simple.xml is the name of this file. So let's just go to my test box here, and I can show you where you would deploy this. Sorry about that. And just a little bit of the layout of how SOI is installed. We have the base SOI directory. We'll have a log directory here, which we'll look at in a little bit. And then there's this resources directory. So under resources, there's a core directory, and under that, a catalog policy. So this is where all the transformation policies, where we transform from the raw data, CIs and alerts, to our common schema within SOI and Catalyst, which is called USM. And so all of these policy, the engine that does that is policy driven, and on your connector box, you'll have this directory, and all of the connectors will have a policy. So here on my particular box, I have a service discovery. I'm actually installed on a manager box. So I have universal connector, I have the SNMP trap connector, and I have the mid-tier connector. So you can see a policy file for each of these. So today, if we took one of these examples off of the community site and we wanted to drop it in, we have to make sure that it's named SNMP_policy. That's determined by the connector configuration as to what the name of the file is, and that's what it is out of the box. So either you can change the connector configuration, or you can just rename it to SNMP_policy.xml. Might be a good idea to back up the one that you have there before you drop a new copy of it. And then the next thing you'll have to do is recycle that. So that's just done through the standard dashboard administration page. You'll select that connector, stop it, restart it again, and that will reload the policy. And then the final step would be to test it. What I use for testing, you can just use your favorite trap testing utility, trap generator. We use a CA trap, or I use it. That came from the NISM product from years ago. And it turns out if you have the event connector, that actually does ship with the CA trap utility. And you can find that when you install that, it'll say event integration, and then you can just search for CA trap.exe, and you'll be able to find it in there. And there's some examples in there as well of how to generate those traps. Now, in the 3.1 product that's going to come out, I think Dave mentioned here early this year, there is a better way to do this. So one of the problems, just going back to this directory, is what if you have multiple policies? So let's say I want to take the BAC policy and the sysview policy and maybe 3 or 4 other policies, and I want all of them to be, I want to be able to integrate with all the traps, not just one single source of traps. What I would have to do then is crack this open and actually merge all of those together, and that's kind of painful to do. So in the 3.1, what you'll be able to do is drop those files directly into this extensions directory. You can actually see I already have an extension in here for the mid-tier connector. But you'll be able to drop them in as they are, as they're named, without needing to change them. There is a format. It's SNMP_policy dot and then some unique identifier .xml. But all the ones posted on the community site are in that format. You'll drop them in there, you'll recycle the connector, and then it'll merge them all together automatically. So that's coming in 3.1. That'll be much easier to maintain and deal with. So that's how to apply existing policies. How do you write your own policy, or how do you tweak policy? So this part of the discussion is not just useful for the SNMP connector, but it can be useful for, there are other types of connectors that we offer, generic connectors, where it becomes useful to, there's not a lot of out-of-box policy. One example is Omnibus, NetPool Omnibus. Again, you're dealing with kind of a generic event system, so anything can come into it. The schema can be configured anyway, and so we are making improvements to that particular one. I think there's another one, one of the tech connectors is like this as well, where or Ops MVS is another one on the mainframe side, where it's a generic event feed, much like traps. You don't have much control over what the schema looks like. And so we provide some examples to the policy, but we can't provide a lot of out-of-box policy. So this discussion will be good, I think, not just for the SNMP connector, but also for those connectors as well. So before I dive into and we start looking at the policy itself, I will just show you, against my better judgment, I guess, I will show you a kind of an architecture diagram. This might explain a little bit about how this connector works. So unlike a traditional connector, where when the connector starts up, it can go to a domain manager and query for any existing alerts or any existing CIs. And then after its startup, it can listen to changes. This connector there is no domain manager, or the domain manager is transparent to it. All it knows is that it just listens for traps, and it doesn't really know or care what's on the other end. I mean, that's the nature of SNMP traps. So you have a trap listener, and what that does, it queues up the traps as they come in case you have an enormous storm of traps. At least we don't drop anything; we queue them up, and then the main processor will pull those traps off of the queue, and then it does two transformations here. So unlike a traditional connector, which knows that it's listening for CIs or it's listening to alerts, here there's only one bit of information, and that's the trap. And we have to infer from that trap what the CI information is, and we have to infer from that trap what the alert information is. And so it does two transformations. It transforms the trap, the varbinds primarily, into a CI, and we'll see how this works in just a moment. And then it also takes that same raw trap and creates an alert out of it, and then it publishes. This is really ugly looking here, but this is actually some of the internal methods that are called. But actually publishes each of those to Catalyst, just like a traditional connector would. But the difference is, in how the data, how it transforms the data. So for better or for worse, I just throw that out to you. Now, let's look at the policy. And the first one we're going to look at, this is pretty much the only one we'll look at. We might glance at some of the others. But this is a simple policy. This is the one that's on the community site under tested. And this is intended to be just the bare bones, simplest example of policy, just to serve as an example. So the first thing of interest here, you'll notice there's the elements called event classes. So the two most important, or the two entry points, are event class item and event class alert. So what the connector does when it does a transform, when it transforms that trap, the varbinds, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, it does one for CIs. It's going to hit this part of the policy. So this is the entry point. And when it does the one for alert, it will hit this part of the policy. And that's true, again, for any of the connectors, not just the trap connector. What you'll see, we'll start with the CI part of this. We have a classify operation. And what this does is try to subclass in the case where maybe we have several different kinds of traps coming in. Rather than try to deal with that all in one event class, which can get really ugly, we can subclass it out into different event classes. So what we're saying here is if the enterprise, and this is a raw property that comes in from the trap connector, the SNMP enterprise, if it matches this regular expression, so it has, you know, in the OID it has 99,253, then we're going to subclass this. We're going to say it's a computer system, and we're going to subclass it to a computer system CI. And the rest of this is just common things that, regardless of how we subclass it, this will get these operations will get performed as well. And that's just setting common USM required USM properties like MDR product instance. So this particular connector has this designation for the product. And the product instance is typically it's actually the connector. It's the connector host. In this case, I've got it set to the sender, the trap sender. But yeah, this part tends to be common. So if we go down to the computer system, we're setting another required property for any CI is this element ID. And in this case, normally you'd probably pull this out of the trap itself, but I'm hard coding it here to the CS1, computer system 1. Another required property is some kind of device name or IP address. So we picked the primary DNS name, and we're just going to set that to the SNMP agent. And then I set computer name. That's optional, but I set that to the same thing. So that's the CI, and we'll see an example of what it looks like when it comes in raw and what happens after it's transformed. On the alert side, it's very similar. I subclass it to something called myAlert, which I have down here. And it's kind of the same thing. Required property is summary, severity. Within the alert, there's something called alerted MDR properties, alerted MDR product instance, element ID. That is a reference to the CI. So again, this is true for any connector, not just the SNMP connector. So you have to make sure that if this alert for it to show up in SOI, it has to be associated to a CI, and this is the piece that associates it. So I have to make sure this CS1 is the MDR element ID for my CI. The other thing I'm doing interesting here is I can parse, so I can actually parse out the varbind list. In this case, I'm taking the entire list and parsing it using a regular expression, and ultimately I'm assigning it to the summary. So yeah, this is just intended to be an introduction, so I don't want to confuse you, but I just want to kind of hit the high points here. There's the event classes, there's the entry points to those event classes. You can subclass these things, and you can perform operations on them. The other thing, again, just to drive home, if this is a CI, SOI and Catalyst are strongly typed. So this isn't like we're sending traps into NISM or Spectrum, where we can set where our CI can be an event model, as the case with Spectrum, or in the case of NISM, the CI might not even exist. There is no association. There's no strong association between the alert and the CI in something like NISM, and neither of those systems are strongly typed. So the USM is strongly typed. So I have to have this item. It has to be a valid. The CI has to be a valid USM type. So I pick computer system, but there's a whole bunch of different types. There's generic IP device. There's network, router, switch. There's application, background process, etc. IT activity. There must be 60 or 70 different USM types. And those USM types have required properties. So for computer system or generic IP device, it's just the standard required properties, which are some kind of ID which we call the MDR properties. It stands for Management Domain Repository, by the way. So the domain manager and an element ID within that domain manager, and some kind of device address, whether it be DNS name, sys name, IP4, IPv6, etc. So those are required. So you're going to have to be somewhat familiar with USM to be able to do this, I guess, is the point. Yeah, so I guess the final step, I did want to show you what some of the properties look like as they come from the connector and what happens to them after they're transformed. I guess before we do that, let's just show you what it looks like, what my example trap looks like. So I sent one of these earlier. I'll send another one here. Let's get rid of this one. And this is just going to send a CA trap. This has that simple policy that we talked about that's on the community site, which has this enterprise 1299253. I'm sending 2 var binds in here, and the values are just, they're octet strings. They just say var bind 1 value and var bind 2 value. So pretty simple trap here. And you can see it shows up here, and in the summary and in the message text down below. It simply takes the entire var bind string, all the values together. So a better example, as you get into some of these other policies, you'll see they actually parse out the var binds and assign them to something useful, or format them in a much nicer way, or maybe even determine what the CI is. Is it a computer system as an application? What the name of the CI, the instance name of it is, etc. But this really a simple example. That's all it does. Now, so yeah, we want to look at how it, internally what's going on. So I think the next thing I want to talk about is debugging, and so this will be an excellent opportunity to actually see in the debug information what this trap looks like in its raw form and what it looks like in its transformed. What happens to it, what the connector does to it. So there's really 3 places to look for debug information. So the first place is in something called the event store. So there's 2 ways to get to the event store. One way, if you're familiar at all with the event management capabilities that we added in 3.0, I can go to event policies. I can pick the SNMP connector, or I can just pick all the connectors, and I can just search for everything. So I've sent a few traps out here prior to the call, so we should probably see. Well, I guess we see two of these come through, and these are actually normalized. You can see these are in USM format. So that's one way to tell whether I'm whether my trap came in and whether we transformed it properly. I should point out in future releases, and this is going to be beyond 3.1, probably like in the 3.5 time frame, you can also, through this same UI, look at the raw events. So you could send raw traps in without having any policy and be able to look at those raw events, and then actually be able to create some of this policy through the UI. But we'll talk more about that when 3.5 gets released. But I did want to just point out that that's coming. The other way to look at this information is, and in the absence of 3.5, if we want to look at the raw data, is to go and look at the event store files directly. And so these are under the same area. Core, instead of catalog policy, there's an event store directory. And I'm just going to look for the last. This effectively is a giant database of events, and they get archived periodically. So we'll just look at the latest ones that have come in. And these are organized by connector type. So I see the CA00036, that's the trap connector. And so if I open this up, this normal that I looked at, this is the normalized version. That's exactly what I saw in the UI a few minutes ago. That's what it grabs. And 3.5 will also be able to see the raw data as well. But in 3.0 and 3.1, you are stuck with going and looking at it, directly in this file. So if you're trying to debug this and you're trying to say what came in and what went out, this is the raw trap. Now you'll also notice this has a lot of the normalized data in it as well. But yeah, you can pick out the information that came in from the connector as the raw data, and then you can actually look at it, what it looks like normalized. So that's one place to look. Another place it would be to turn on debug information and look at logs. So I'll talk about how to turn that on in just a second. But first, let's take a look at the logs. So under this log directory, we've got this EI transform.log. Again, by default, this will show up, but it has very minimal information in it. But you have to set that to debug. We'll get a huge amount of information out of this. I'm actually going to bring it up here. I've opened it previously, and I've got it kind of pointing to the right place, so I'm just going to open an existing one. So again, here's an entry point where the classifier is kind of the first step in the chain of transformation. And here are all of the raw properties that the connector, when the trap comes in, as it parses the trap, it creates all of these raw properties. So the SNMP agent, SNMP enterprise, specific trap number, generic trap number. For some reason, oh, there it is. Generic trap number 6, specific trap number 1. Event type. So this event type is the entry point. When it actually sends it into the engine, the transformation engine, it'll be alert. But this particular dump here happens after the classify. So it's changed it to my alert, which is the subclass. The varbind vowels and then the varbind oids are down here. And these are just comma delimited. So it'll take all the oids and just create a comma delimited list, all the varbind vowels, comma delimited list of that. And then, so as we go through here, it'll go through each operation, and after each operation, it'll do a dump. So in the parse, I don't know if you remember, we parsed out the varbind vowels, and we assigned it to this new property, test CI message, so you can see, what that's set to. And then later on, we formatted that into the summary, so you can scroll down here. Here's the format, and then we should see that value in the summary. And so it really provides a incredibly detailed view of what's happening, and that will help you debug your policy. What have I done wrong? What have I left out? And this has the alert and the CI in it, so we can find the CI in here as well. The other place for debug information is the connector log. So I've got an SNMP connector log here. Let me just bring this up. And you can see when I start the connector, it's looking at the connector configuration, so it's providing a dump of that. It's telling me system's up, and the trap listener received a trap. It's a V1 trap. Here's the varbind oids. Here's the varbind vowels, et cetera, et cetera. And then it shows me this particular one was the CI, and this is what it looks like after it transformed it. So put in the computer name. There's some freebies in here as well. We do this internally. We create a label, primary DNS name, et cetera. And here's the same thing for the alert. So that's another useful place to look as you're debugging these policies. Now the question is, how do you enable these logs? It would be great if some of this information is very detailed. So I think the transform log, it makes sense that and I believe there's instructions in the product guide on how to do this, but it makes sense that that's a manual step. The connector, unfortunately, it should have some default logging out of the box, but it does not. So that's an area we're trying to address, and we're working with the team to fix. But I can show you how to do that. Under Resources, there's this log4j XML. I think I already have that open, so let me just bring it up. And in here you'll see, here's the EI transform. Normally this is, it's further down here. Normally this is commented out, or it's set to error. I can't remember which, but either you uncomment it or change the level on it, and that'll turn on the EI transformation detail. The connector is a little different. It simply does not have any entry in here at all. So what I'll do is like I said, we're working with the connector team to add this and by default, and that's what I did. I just copied. I basically copied one of these others, called it SNMP, and then if you're familiar with Log4j, and that's something I can probably put out on the community site on how to do that, because I think that's the connector supports logging, but they don't support any out-of-box way to actually write out, to provide the logger and appender configuration. So that's really about all I have. I know a bit of this was a bit technical, but such was the nature of the feedback and the questions that were coming on the community site. So I want to make sure we talked about the policy, and like I said, this could definitely help you with other connectors as well. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions either about this presentation or about anything that Dave said.
At this time, I would like to remind everyone, in order to ask a question, press star, then the number 1. We'll pause for just a moment for the Q&A roster. At this time, there are no questions.
There's a couple of questions online. Jeff, are you able to access them on the panel there?
Yeah, I am. So I'm looking at those now. So I see, here we go. Okay. This is from John McCullough. Question on SOI, can you talk about the general direction on multi-tenant capability for your service provider customers? And related but more specific, can you tell us when you have the ability to have a remedy ticket integration with multiple instances of remedy from a single instance of SOI? So the first question is just about multi-tenant capability. And I know Subodh is on. I'll take a quick stab at that. I know some of the folks that work in our global services have come up with a way, even in 3.0, to do some multi-tenanted type of stuff. In 3.5 and beyond, we're definitely, with Catalyst, they, for example, CIs won't be correlated if they're from different tenants. There's ways to configure the connector. In the cases where you might have a domain manager that doesn't provide, that isn't multi-tenant aware, there's a way to configure within the connector to say that everything coming from this domain manager is a certain tenant, or even more granular than that. So there are some things we're doing in the future, and there is kind of some workarounds today. I'm not as familiar with the workarounds, and maybe Subodh is, and I don't know that we've released any of that information. But so I'll stop. Subodh or Dave, can you add to that? And you might be on mute. I'm not sure.
Subodh, are you able to speak?
His line is open.
Okay. So he may had to drop off. So yeah, I mean, hopefully that answers that question. The second question, when you see the ability to have remedy ticket integration with multiple instances of remedy. Okay. Yeah, I do not know the answer to that one. What we could do, I could go out and try to get the answers to some of these and post them on the community site, or hand them over to either Stephen or Mary. But I don't know that off the top of my head. I don't know if you do, Dave.
I'm may be able to get back to it here in a moment, so we'll come back to it.
Okay.
Yeah, we can always start a thread on the community site of these questions and post the answers later.
Yeah, I understand the question. I just don't know the answer to it. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on here. Would I be able to use the SNMP connector to take traps from storage devices and create CIs and events in SOI? And so, yeah, the answer is yes. If the storage devices send traps, we can, using this connector, it'll create the CIs as we. I didn't demonstrate that actually. I only showed the alert coming through. The CI was already created, but it will also create the CI. Right now they go into Spectrum, and it forwards it to the ticketing system, but it doesn't create any CIs. So this is a very interesting point, because I was hoping this question would come up. So I think a lot of people are wondering, why would I go to the trouble to do this if I could just, if I already have a trap integration via the Spectrum southbound gateway, why wouldn't I not just use Spectrum? And the answer is you would use Spectrum. That would be if Spectrum is in your environment, and you currently have trap integration through Spectrum, then it makes sense to just forward those CIs and alerts through the Spectrum connector. Really, the trap connector comes into play where you either don't have Spectrum in your environment, or it doesn't make sense to push those traps into Spectrum. So if it's application-type traps, or it's just something that is not system-related. But yeah, so the answer is yes. You can use the trap connector. If they go into Spectrum, so your point is they go into Spectrum and then they go into a ticketing system, but you don't want Spectrum to generate tickets against them, or for some reason you don't want them to go into Spectrum. Then yeah, this would make sense. We've got a third question. We invested a lot on the EI SNMP connector. Will this still be supported? So this is a great question as well. So I did reference a little bit to this thing called EI. So EI is kind of the transformation engine, but it also was a standalone and is a standalone product. And we've relabeled it, renamed it within SOI. We call it the event connector. So if you've ever installed the event connector, that's what this person is talking about. The event connector takes in, historically, it's had feeds from like NISM event. It has a Windows event viewer feed, application log, and then also it had an SNMP adapter, or SNMP listener as well. So that is still around, although I believe in 3.5 and possibly in 3.1, I think in 3.5 we've taken that SNMP capability out of the event connector because it's a duplicate with this trap connector. The good news is that any investment in policy, the policies are very, very similar. In fact, they're a lot easier and they're more robust in the SNMP connector. The problem with the EI connector, it doesn't do a good job of transforming CI. So if it's a computer system or a generic IP device and maybe an application, you're probably going to be okay. But if it's anything else, like an IT activity, like a job flow, or something like that, you will have problems with the EI SNMP. Just the way it works. So I would try to migrate that to the Catalyst SNMP connector, and it should be pretty straightforward to do that. And if not, we certainly can help you do that. It's fairly simple. In fact, some of the policies that I posted out on the community site, they originally were available on the EI version, and I personally have migrated those over, so that it's fairly simple to do that. Next question, SNMP cannot be sent directly from a source without a connector. The SNMP XML will look at all SNMP connectors coming into the SOI manager. So the SNMP listener, if you want to think of it that way, the endpoint is the connector. So there is no direct SNMP integration into SOI. You have to have a connector, this connector that we talked about today. The XML will look at all connectors. The policy that we looked at is per connector. So if you have multiple SNMP connectors in your environment, each of those would have policy associated with them, or policies associated with them, and they could be different. So there's no problem with that. Or you could have one connector, and that one connector can process lots of different traps. And hopefully I explained that today. But so the policy will be able to classify and say, you could merge all the policies that we talked about, the BAC, Ops MVS, SysView, et cetera. You could merge those all into one policy if you wanted to, and effectively that's what happens within the connector. It has multiple policies. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. You can handle it either way. This was from a CA person, and I happen to be on the discussion about this one on the email thread. Is there a way to configure two SNMP connectors in an active HA design and not get duplicate alerts in SOI? So I believe, I'm not an expert on the HA stuff, but it's active passive, and so when you do a failover, the secondary starts up. So you're not going to get duplicates. However, we're talking here about the connectors being in a cluster. So you have a primary and a secondary. The source would have to, what makes this a little different than most other connectors. Let's say you have a Spectrum connector and you fail over. Well, the secondary will just connect to the same domain manager. But here you're listening. So the traps have to come to the connector. They have to be pushed to the connector. So whatever domain manager is out there that's sending these traps, or whatever device, would have to be configured to either send it to both, and the secondary wouldn't be listening, while the primary is listening, or it would have to be configured to switch over somehow. So yeah, it is a kind of a special case in an HA environment because of just the nature of SNMP traps. So Dave, let's go back to that first question.
Yeah, I did get a bit of input on that. So in terms of multiple remedy instances for a single instance of SOI, the near-term answer is no, we don't do that, and it's not trivial. So maybe we could indeed have a thread on the community, or hit me directly with an email, Mike and Dave.Walters@CA, and we can take up the cause from there and see what we can do about it. But not trivial is my tactical word on the subject.
It looks like that second question just changed.
Oh yeah, it did. Yeah. EI gave us a lot of source destination enrichment abilities. How would this be dealt with in 3.1.3.5? So yeah, you do have the same. So again, this person's talking about kind of an EI, the standalone, or the event connector. The event connector is kind of a specialized configuration of EI, where the destination is always SOI. But you do have that capability now in 3.0 and in 3.1, and of course in 3.5 we've added some event capabilities like enrichment. Excuse me, where you can so a feed can come from any connector, and we can push policy down to do enrichment at the connector, or we have a mid-tier connector, which is kind of across a place where these are events, but alerts. All alerts come through this mid-tier connector before they go into SOI, and we can enrich there. So if it's an enrichment that applies to every connector, you can do it there, or you can do it at each individual connector. Same with filtering. The same. There's correlation capabilities as well, which we did not have in EI, where you can look. You can say if event this alert X and alert Y came in within a certain time, that means something different to me than if they occurred independently. So correlation capability. So there's a lot of stuff in 3.0.3.1 and 3.5 that we've added, and we're continuing to add.
Right. If there aren't any other questions, I guess we'll wrap up here. And one of the main reasons I wanted to do this presentation here is because it would be really great at CA World for people to talk about the SNMP connector and any custom connectors they've been doing, sort of touch base with all that, exchange notes in person. I think that'd be a really beneficial use of the time at CA World for the community. So I'd love as many people as possible prior to that to start getting involved more with this SNMP connector. I'm sure it's something that everybody can make use of in their environment and see if they've got any questions. I think it can be really powerful, and I would love to talk to everybody about it there. And again, go and suggest ideas on the community site. Dave, did you have anything else, or Steve?
No, this is Dave. I did not. You, Steve, will send the community more information as we get closer and get an actual schedule for the community meetings at CA World, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yep, okay.
All right, and if you guys have any questions that you think of after this, feel free to email us. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we'll talk to you in a few months.
Thanks, everybody.
This does conclude today's conference call. You may now disconnect.